Welcome again to our continuing series on Where is America Today? Where is it going? We are talking to Professor Joseph CHYTRY. I hope I got the last name right. His point of departure is from California knowledge. He is at the California College of the Arts. He's a senior adjunct critical studies program professor at California College of the Arts undergraduate critical studies program. He's managing editor of the Industrial and Corporate Change, Oxford University Press, at the Institute for Business Innovation and the Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley. He was also included in the Who's Who of America in 2007, 2008, 2009. Since 2014, he has been annually teaching philosophy at the Stanford University Continuing Studies program. He's also the author of Mountains of Paradise, Reflections on the Emergence of Greater California as a World Civilization, Unis versus Cytheria, the Aesthetic State. He's the co-editor of Understanding Industrial and Corporate Change and Technology Organization Competitive Perspectives on Industrial and Corporate Change. So a lot of backgrounds in different fields. This is the interview with the professor today. He received his doctorate in philosophy and politics and the history of ideas from the University of Oxford, and a master's of international affairs degree from Columbia University, and a BA with special honors in international affairs from the George Washington University. Those are all outstanding schools. He was a graduate student in philosophy at the University of Heidelberg, and later a Humboldt postdoctorate fellow at the philosophy at the University of Tübingen, Germany, and he received an honored instructor award from the University of California, Berkeley Extension Program in 2009, and a little bit more basically the same material. So, Professor, did we get anything wrong? Did I say something wrong? Was there some part of the background we did not cover? Any corrections, Professor?
Oh, everything was fine. My name is a Czech name, and it's actually pronounced, but we don't need to do that, CHYTRY. So CHYTRY would be fine. CHYTRY is a normal way of pronouncing it. Second, a little bit of CHYTRY, as a k. It's really a h, but you don't pronounce h in English.
Thank you.
In any case, one small addition is that I'm now also founding director of the Center for Aesthetics and Politics at the California College of the Arts. And we're coming out with our first issue in a new magazine that comes out of Berkeley called Dispatches. So I'd like to add that as well.
What's the issue called?
The magazine is called Dispatches. It's now in its fourth issue. It's we're hoping that it'll be a competitor with the New York Review of Books, but who knows? And finally, just a sin, and I hope I'm not being petty about it, the title of the book that you have referred to is Mountain of Paradise, not Mountains of Paradise. And that's an important difference, because the reason for the title is that Mountain of Paradise is probably the most sustainable translation of the origin of the word California from an ancient Persian word, kari-i-fer, so Mountain of Paradise.
I've heard that story.
Yeah,
I've heard that story on the various. Yes, I have heard that. It was either Queen Califia, or it was the indigenous called it the Hills, or it was this one. Yeah, Furnace Mountain. Yeah, awesome. You're right. Thank you for correcting me. A big fan of California history. The book is called Mountain of Paradise, and that's very specific because it goes back to one of the 3 or 4 fables as to how California got started. And he's also the founder of the Center for Aesthetics and Politics. They're coming out with a new issue of Dispatches, now in its 4th edition. Okay. All right. So the question today, Professor, is, and I understand that you're coming from a point of departure from California, focus on California history. However, you must have heard that at some point living here, that California is a little bit different from American culture. We're seen as a little bit wild and maybe a little bit strange and at the cutting edge, and not exactly how they do things in Iowa. Going off that, and the fact that you've been here for a while. You have lived for a couple decades in
I have,
America.
yes, I have lived here since 1977 in Berkeley, California.
Right. So you've lived through the 70s in Berkeley. That's pretty intense. Um, and you've also seen, I'm sure, the Iraq war protests that happened in the Bay Area. People were very upset. How divided is America today in comparison to when you got here in the 70s? In your opinion, from what you've seen, and maybe a little bit of your professional background, are things the same? Have they gotten worse? Is this just something America always goes through? It's no big deal. We have political division all the time and we always get over it. Or is this a new level of xenophobia and distrust of the other that we haven't seen in recent modern American history? In your opinion, Professor?
My opinion obviously reflects my own background, so I should make it quickly. My family escaped Czechoslovakia prior to the communist coup of 1948. We got out of Iran as a result of the Mossadegh crisis there, and we got out of Brazil after the president Getulio Vargas blew his brains out. So coming to America meant that I was coming to a much, much safer place, and that, of course, is going to affect my sense of what you describe as possible dissension and difficulties as far as the American experience
Sure.
is concerned.
Sure.
From that, I would make the following basic comment. I am familiar with American history. I've studied it with some length, and it's very clear that I have no problem in finding all kinds of crises, let's say the 1930s, the battle between the left and the right, the possibility that California could even have become a fascist state if you've read your Kevin Starr books. The 50s, of course, we all know about the horrible effects of a certain extreme anti-communism. The 60s, well, you were here, I was here, not necessarily in California, but I was at Columbia, and Columbia was one of the takeoff points for a lot of demonstrations. And we can go on and on and on. In other words, living in America means that you're dealing with an extremely entrepreneurial and innovative society. And if you don't like it, I guess you should move back to Denmark, where you're nice and safe and you have a very comfortable social democratic program to cover you all the way to your death. But given that this is the nature of the American experiment, always trying new things, and given, as you correctly pointed out, Mr. Ruiz Evans, that California is the edge of that and has been for a number of reasons, then one shouldn't be surprised that here we go again with another very extreme set of challenges. And there's no reason to play it down to say, well, it's happened before in other guises, so it's all fine, it'll all work out. Nothing ever ultimately works out just by itself. If you have a decent marriage and then you have problems, you have to face it. Anyone major crisis could bring an end to it. So I'm always to say, let's pay serious attention. And if you therefore ask me, is it more today than at other times, I would say that's an impossible question for me to answer. But I would certainly say that it's a serious challenge, and I'm among the many people who want to deal with it as well as I can.
You have some experience in Czechoslovakia. You have some experience with Iran. You have some experience with Brazil, all when they were destabilized. Do you see signs now between America as it is now
Right.
and some of those countries right before things started popping off in the bad way?
Yes. And so I can also say that in all those three cases, the conditions were far more extreme. In the case of Czechoslovakia, they were coming out of World War II. In the case of Brazil, one was dealing with unprecedented crisis of the kingdom of the Shah. And in the case of Brazil, it was making a transition, which unfortunately usually led in the 60s, as you know, to a dictatorship. So all those three cases are far more extreme than the United States. Perhaps one has a privileged position in California, and no doubt there are other states that suffer many more problems that they have to deal with. But California overall, if you are a person as I am who likes to travel through California, and I don't mean the centers, but really the smaller towns, the countryside, the agriculture, your general impression is astoundingly successful operation, and it has serious problems, of course. But serious problems are not the same as crisis or one is on the edge of a precipice. I don't see a remote possibility of that as of this moment. That's speaking from the vantage point of California. You would have to ask me, if I happen to be living in Mississippi, whether conditions are appropriate or crisis oriented and so on. Now, if there are enough of states that are suffering far more grievously than I would say then the issue, of course, would come to the front. But these are states that are very minor economic and population presences in the United States. So one would want to deal with them on a federal level, state level, depending on, of course, the representatives in those states. But overall, I would be very surprised that one would regard the United States as this moment really as a country, a society in precipitous decline and collapse. It just seems like the most absurd of conceptions, unless you pose yourself in the room with your media and are susceptible to what the media loves to do, which is to constantly emphasize crisis. Once again, though, I'm not speaking about avoiding problems, serious problems. They need to be dealt with.
I'd like to ask you a question. So you have a lot of experience in these fallen international regimes. You have an international policy background. I love that. I love foreign policy.
Good.
January 6th, to my knowledge, is considered a coup by most coup experts in Europe and around the world. It qualifies. At least I've seen some academic studies. Nothing to worry about, or kind of the thing that you saw in these countries right before things popped off?
January 6th was a very serious action on the part of the former president of the United States, in my view. So one would have to recur to the question of what is the importance of this former president, who apparently wants to run again and who is being indicted in several offenses, and probably he'll get some more indictments coming from elsewhere, such as Georgia. So it's a very unpleasant business. And from what I understand, the federal government, the appropriate authorities, are taking people into court, subjecting them, of course, to very serious scrutiny. And from what I understand, the sentences have varied, but they're very strict, and they are representative of a very effective system that deals with uprisings. Now, we've had strange uprisings before. We don't need to go through all the list. I only have to mention to you, sir, Waco, Texas, Oklahoma City, and so on. So you have these strange events taking place. Strange in the sense that in a country today of 320 million people, you will find excessive characters, violent characters, characters who have no conception of what they mean when they say they want to, as it were, change or whatever it is that they intend. But they're being dealt with by, in my view, the most powerful military force in the history of the world. I think no one can deny that as of this moment. So it's distressing that this happened, but it's very, very reinforcing that actions have been taken. I don't necessarily see that as in any way one step away from civil war, which is, of course, what the proponents of January 6th in many cases want to argue. No, it's no American Revolution of the
Okay. I can see that.
Now, if you're trying to draw, as was suggested by your comments, on European opinions, and I don't know what specific sources you're using, but I would just make a gentle warning, not necessarily warning, but a suggestion. Europeans have had a long-term envy of America. It happens again and again, and in certain countries and at certain times, depending on their ideologies, such as Paris during the 1960s and 70s, and even later, there is a general tendency to quickly respond if it seems like America is in serious trouble as far as they're concerned. So one should be very careful about the analysis of January the 6th that's coming out of, let's say, certain West European media sources.
Fair enough. I will just say that a lot of people who study coups around the world considered January 6th the coup. Maybe it was the worst coup ever. Maybe it was not handled well. But according to many experts, it qualifies. How does that say stability, given that we've never had the Capitol storm since 1812? The other examples you mentioned were not the Capitol. I mean, this is the first time we've had the Capitol stormed. First time there's a Confederate flag in the Capitol that terrified people. We've never had anything since 1812. This has to be somewhat of a significant event. No?
I agree. It is because it was fundamentally preceded by the worst choice of a president in the history of the United States, a man without any qualities whatsoever. Then your question would have to be, why would such a man be elected in 2016 in the first place? I think there were a lot of surprises by people who voted for that man. And in 2020, this particular individual, utilizing what remaining sources he had of presidential power, clearly was behind the whole idea of this January. Serious business, but the serious business is that the population voted for him in 2016. And in 2020, they clearly did not vote for him. So that's where you have the coup, as you call it, taking on a special significance because you've never had a president like that. And again, the kind of actions he's been taking since then are further confirmations of a very strange and unusual intrusion into American politics, change over time as we get into 2024, whatever the choice of the Republicans is for their standard bearer.
Sure, absolutely. It's because of Trump. I believe that. But the point was that we're talking about the disintegration or the falling apart of social cohesion. We've had a coup like we've never had before, ever in American history, going back to maybe 100, 150, 20 years. That's not a good sign for stability. I would also add in former CIA analyst Barbara Walters, not 20 minutes. It's Barbara Walters, a different person. She's an analyst out of San Diego. And she has a book called How Civil Wars Start. If anybody goes in, type in on How Civil Wars Start. This is the New York Times, Wall Street Journal. She's been all over TV. And she's saying, hey, I'm an analyst for the CIA for decades. And they call me to say, when do you think the society is going to collapse? And so we developed these metrics of 5 different things we look at, and we rate every country for their probability of collapse. Well, guess what? America is ticking up its way towards collapse, according to our CIA analyst metrics, which have been pretty accurate for the last 2 decades. Is she totally off? Maybe she's seeing something?
She may well. Metrics are a very interesting thing to study. So I would have to look very carefully at what passed for this analysis and then make my own inferences. If you're bringing it up to say, well, there are others, we see that there are some extremely sensitive matters that are coalescing and that this is in some way a promise of a civil war. I can only say that I would have to, again, check what evidence they are presenting and how they're going about coming up with, again, the matrices that they're using. These are very, very impressionistic areas. And it all depends, also, not all, but to a certain extent, it also depends on a certain inclination.
Fair.
They're not worried, which is a good thing. And therefore, they will want to emphasize, this sounds like there are dangerous possibilities here that are developing. We need to start countering that with whatever they will come up with as their advice.
Counter narrative. Yeah, they don't. They're worried about what people are thinking, so they could put this in there to either scare them towards it or scare them away from it. Yeah. The metrics.
But again, I'm not opposing it. You brought something very interesting to me. I would have.
Sure. The 2 major metrics that
she was the CIA attitude. Yeah.
The 2 major metrics that she looked at was what she called level of democracy and ethnic offense. So basically,
offense? What's that?
Basically,
offense.
Yeah. So there is a ethnic group who feels that things aren't going their way and they're not being treated fairly. and they maybe were in power. Like if you look at Iraq, where the Sunnis were in charge under Saddam, and then they lost power under the invasion. And then they're like, hey, we used to be in power, and now we lost power. We're losing as an ethnicity. So we need to fight to get back the things we've lost.
Mhm.
That's one factor she's looking at. The other one is,
Well, stop a minute. Let's just look at that one. I assume, you're using vague words, but I assume you're referring to so-called white population of the
she
United
is
States.
the
Yeah, you
CIA
are
analyst
using her
is,
material.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, she says that because there's
Okay,
a
well, let's take a look.
aggrieved white
Certainly.
people.
Yeah, well, certainly among certain white people, and I would say would be a percentage, and you would have to look at their economic and social background, how high up they are. There is a sense of aggrievement because this is becoming a much more multi-ethnic country. And as you know, in California, it's even more pronounced, where now we have a Latin plurality, which I'm very happy about. Personally, I admire of the whole classical world, the Latin world, and certainly Latin America has a very strong
Really.
quality in that. So I look forward to that. I would insist that there are three languages that future Californians should have in their grip. Obviously, English, Spanish, and Mandarin. But that's
That's
just
what
my
I've been saying. That is what
all
I
right.
have been saying for the last 10 years. Three: Mandarin, Spanish, English, and we could rule the world if we all had all California children know
There
those
we
things.
go. Well, I'm your follower. I'm your
I've
acolyte.
said the same thing. This is what we need to be teaching all our kids in school. It would allow us to be able to trade on 3 different continents.
Because the latest figures I have are 38, 39% Latino, what is it, 14, 15% Asian, majority being Chinese American. And then actually, interestingly enough, the African American population is pretty well down. I think it's 5.8 compared to the American figure of 12. So the African American population has, unfortunately for them, moved from being second to the fourth, if you will, ethnic group. So it's even more pronounced in California. I assume that there are comparable figures, maybe not like this in Texas and elsewhere.
I'm sure there
And
are.
of course, the priorities of social background, ethnic practices, and so on are going to play an important role. From my point of view, it's a tremendous reinforcement of the American experience. And as one would expect, there are those who feel they are losers, and that would be a certain percentage of what one might call, in a very vague way, the white population. So there's a challenge there. There's no doubt about that.
That's what she said. She said
Yeah.
was basically Trump has basically exacerbated this white
Yes.
identity. Not everybody who's white falls into this, of course, but some people do feel attracted to his ideology, and he has coalesced something through his dog whistling of we're a bunch of white people. We used to be in control. Now we're not in control. We're losing our status. We're starting to go down the hill. We need to fight back as our ethnic group. And she's saying some of the stuff he did resembles what we've seen in other countries right before things fall apart. I'm part of this group. I don't see you as fellow countrymen, fellow Iraqis, fellow Somalis. I see you as a separate ethnic group. And I feel that my ethnic group is down because you guys just don't like us because of who we are. And so now I'm mad and I need to hurt you. And I need to hurt everybody who's not part of my ethnicity because my ethnicity is being attacked simply because we are whatever ethnic group we are. And I can, for a fact, I've met some Trump supporters who absolutely feel that way. And there's been a fair amount of documentation. White people are dying off at higher numbers in the Midwest and the South, the opioid epidemic. There's a couple different things to show that. And there is also a demographic shift where they're going from majority of the population to they're going to be a minority voting population by 2045. And they're aware of this. They're aware that they're in the final 15 years of having power. And that's what Barbara Walters said was the trouble zone, was when people realized we're going to be all the way out of power in a little bit of time. So this is our window to fight back and secure what we have, or just let it all go. She says that's the dangerous time. We're about to lose everything we had. We better fight. Humans will fight if they think something's being taken away, much more than if they feel they're going to get something new. You want this new thing? I'm not sure. Can I take something small you've already had? I will kill you for it. Like that's just some way we're sort of wired. The other point that she looked at was the conditions of democracy.
Mhm.
If you had a strong democracy and a strong republic, things are fine. But if you start to get, there's some word she had for it, which basically means kind of a heavily corrupt democracy. It sort of operates, but people are like, yeah, but it's really corrupt. There's not really a fair sense of democracy. Yeah, we kind of vote a guy in, but it's really that was going to be that guy anyways. And she says when the amount of people don't have that much faith in the fairness of the democratic system, and it seems to slide to more of an oligarchic system, that you have problems. Well, we have a lot of people who are not sure how well American democracy is working now and are concerned about its future, especially when we look at Republicans and them trying to. The appearance on the left is disenfranchise the vote for minorities in many different states across America. And she's going, it's not necessarily the actions, it's the appearance of, I don't live in a country with a stable democracy. I live in a country with kind of a rigged democracy. And she goes, when you see those two things, I'm in a rigged democracy and my ethnic group has something to fight for. And those are the two factors roughly. I'm not doing it enough justice, but just to answer your question, those are roughly the two
The
things.
second factor in a second, but I still want to make a small point about the ethnic business. Trump, this person who was president, I don't even want to use his name, picked that up, what you referred to, and took advantage of it. But it wasn't as if, we know his history. I mean, he was all over the place before that. He was even in cartoons about becoming a president. I remember in the 1990s with The Simpsons.
Yep.
He will grab anything, and he grabbed that. But it's not as if he was a white supremacist. There's no ideology. So he grabbed that, and so it's a sign that that was available, and he's, of course, exploited it even more so since then, starting really with his comments about Obama's background. Okay, so let's put that aside. On the second point about democracy, well, the fact of the matter is that the U.S. has never been, in a pure sense, a democracy. It's always been oligarchic. We don't need to bring up slavery, where a huge percentage of the population had no role what to play whatsoever to different periods of history, the way in which presidents were elected, in which Congress was elected. In fact, as you know, the Senate only became democratic in the 20th century as far as voting patterns. That is the past history. The good part is that it's been criticized. One has worn on it. One has worked away again and again on it. So it could very well be that right now one is seeing all the, if you will, the shortcomings that need to be improved, and that's a extremely good. It's more a sense of having arrived at a maturity, at a sense of sophistication about what it takes to have a genuine democracy, which is an almost impossible task, but one in which we're all, I hope, committed as Americans and as Californians. So that means looking carefully at the way votes are collected. Yes, if the right wing wants to say there's been some playing around with that, let's check. Let's make sure the votes are properly assembled. We had that interesting case of the 2000 election. I won't go into. And let's take a look at what states. I would look at the right-wing states and say there's plenty of oligarchy there. So work on that as well. Therefore, in my view, these are serious problems, as I've said at the start, that need to be dealt with, that need to be challenged and are being challenged. And it's not surprising that it sounds like it's a big turmoil. Of course, it's a big turmoil. I don't know what one expects from democracy. Get a little serious and read your books on Athenian democracy, the original basis, and see how the idea of that democracy was that keyword agon, which means competition, struggle. That's the proper way in which democracy keeps unfolding and moving, hopefully, in a spiral. So that we've reached this point is a reflection both of the left and the right having their own criticisms to make, and the rest of us, at least I consider myself somewhere in the middle, perhaps slightly to the left, deal with it as best we can in terms of our voting patterns. I don't see any real major violation. Read in terms of, again, the challenges, whether they were in Arizona or Georgia, they're dealt with by remarkably, in my view, objective administrators have to deal with these matters. So I guess I don't play the game of having some kind of pure image that somehow we've fallen away from. I see a continual historical evolution. In that sense, I'm a Hegelian. That is to say, progress takes place through, and sometimes, yes, it gets violent, and therefore one hopes that one has the means to deal with it. I think the US has astounding means of dealing with violence. So if what you're bringing up, this explosive combination, were to reach what I would call real civil war conditions, and you only need to look at other countries to see what that means, real civil war, where you have rogue states, where you have no control, then let's see if this is a firm, stable system. The basis of it remains a form of control. In fact, that's the basis of some complaints about
That's
it.
fair.
I
That's
don't see
fair.
any way in which some kind of civil war is going to get out of control. You really seriously think that the authorities, and we don't need to go down the list of the number of military, of the again of the police, of all that which acts to control, that's somehow going to evaporate in some way, and it's going to permit a kind of a looseness of control.
I don't. I don't. But I do
Can't even imagine.
think that there is data to say that this is significant. January 6th is significant. We've never seen anything like that in a century. Many experts are saying that this January 6th is bad. I look at that as a singular historic event, and I don't think we can go, well, we've had tough times, and that is really unique.
Oh, I agree
And
with you. It
experts
is
have
unique.
said so. I think that's if things collapse 20 years from now, we will definitely look at January 6th and go, well, that was a point when things started turning, at Gettysburg. I'm not saying it goes that way in the future, but I'm just saying, studying enough history, that's the kind of event where they go, when did things pop off before Columbia fell apart? Oh, maybe it was this January 6th thing. The other thing I look at is, you're right, we've had tough times before, but there's a Princeton, Northwestern University, and a Princeton University joint study that looked at laws that the public wanted. And this came out in 2014. It was not contradicted by anybody. And this Princeton Northwestern University looked at laws the public wanted going back to the 1970s. And basically what they found out is if the public wants something, they never get it. If corporate America wants something, they do get it. And so basically the public's opinion has had a, quote, infinitesimally small impact on American democracy. Basically, the people don't get what they want. The democracy works for the corporations. This study was also backed up by Harvard Business School. Nobody contradicted it. You go back to 2014. That's not a good sign for us working our problems out and having a functional democracy. The other thing I would point to is in 2016, you had half the country doubt the legitimacy of a president. So Donald Trump gets elected, half liberals. I was here in California. Hell no, he's not our president. Russia installed him. He did not win the election. Nobody put him in. We now know that's not true. We now know from studies that if Russia interfered, it was no more than, I think, a 1% effect on the voting population. And in fact, Americans did vote him in. Then you can fast forward to 2020. Biden is legitimately elected, but now conservatives are mad. And they go, well, you doubted our election, so we're going to doubt yours. So now we have one election where half the country doubts the legitimately elected president. And we go to the next election, they doubt the legitimately elected president. And this is right on top of a coup. These can't be good signs of stability. These are historical events that have not happened in a century. And the fact that they're happening kind of ticking off close to each other.
All you have to do is remember 2004, where a large number of Democrats said they were going to leave for Canada if Bush won re-election. And
Right.
that was right in the midst of a very, very brutal Iraqi war, which I was firmly opposed to from the start. The stupidity of it, I think, was horribly costly for everyone, including the United States. So that's one point. Second point is, let's go over the material of the late 60s and early 70s. I can show you very expert figures that's holding it together. The resistance, not just to Vietnam, but the extreme of left and right, the middle majority, Nixon versus, again, these crazy young people who want to destroy the whole system with some kind of vague quasi-Marxism or Maoism. There's no hope that will come out of it. I can actually show you expert opinion, not just people blathering along, but expert opinion published in columns of whether it's the New York Times or the Washington Post, making that statement. Not to say that it's not a serious matter that you're bringing up now. I agree with you completely. All I'm saying is that let's put it in context.
Right.
There will be more stable and less stable period. I agree completely. This is a less stable period. And it was, again, because of some very serious shortcomings. And you've pinpointed the questions that have to be raised, the relation between corporations' priorities and the people's priorities that have been pushing and pushing, especially since, as you know, 2008, with further kicks in the early 2010s, 2015s, and so on. I only need to bring up again the movements of 2011, which petered out for sure, but there were those who said, uh-oh, here we go.
Occupy Wall Street.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely.
So it is a very serious period. Again, I hope I haven't said anything which minimizes that. I think there are some crucial matters that have to do with increasing disparities of wealth that, in my view, can help economically, something that you haven't brought up yet, and that is that ever since the 60s and 70s, something huge has taken place. Let's call it the digital revolution. It's sweeping us away. I only need to mention a few things about AI to remind you that we're almost out of control in terms of what's taking place as it manifests itself in terms of everyday life, employment, robotics. That whole business is now, in my view, it seems to go with increasing disparities of wealth on a large scale, because
yes,
the kind of knowledge that you can benefit from in terms of your expertise is quite small in relative terms, in terms of the whole employment realm. And those who are benefiting from it are benefiting from it in an almost exponential manner, given what you can do in terms of finances, in terms of investments, and so on. So that's where I think you have even the making over what you've been bringing up so far. Look at that and ask yourself, not you personally, but we ask ourselves, what is this all about? What has released this monster that began, we could say, maybe in the 18th century with the Industrial Revolution, the confluence of modern science and technology at that time, to the point where from the 1930s and 40s on, we've taken off with this digital technology that is just massive and has, some would say, incredible promise on, again, employment patterns and in terms of wealth. And that's where it seems to me crisis develops. The rest of it is just the manifestation of the effects that work their way throughout society. When you talk about the ethnicity of whites worrying, they're worrying also because insofar as they lack the educational levels to maintain any kind of role to play, and even those with good educational backgrounds may be removed because of robotics and AI, yes, there are good reasons to be very, very concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. So the real crisis is, I think you're pointing out, we're having a big increase in the wealth gap. I remember
Yes.
with the housing collapse of 2008 to 2010, after it was all said and done and we bailed out the banks, basically a lot of the wealth from the middle class was sucked out of the middle class and moved up to the elites. Then you can go up to COVID, and it happened again. And it comes out after the event. Oh, for whatever reason, we don't know, but for whatever reason, massive transfer out of the middle class up to the elites, 2008, 2010, and then 2019 to 2021. Those are two back to back. I mean, the middle class is getting sucked dry basically over the last decade. And I think you're pointing to that and saying, let's look at that as the spark that may ignite something really bad. Fair enough. Fair point.
Except that when you say the spark, if you don't mind my suggesting, it seems like you have this image of a civil war, or possibly. And I don't have that at all. I don't think that these kinds of conflicts manifest like that. It's just, those are scenarios that belong to earlier industrial societies or pre-industrial societies. Again, you're dealing with the most powerful event right now in the world, the United States, this digital revolution. There are other countries that are also doing it, but we're really in the lead, and especially, of course, as you know, in California. So I don't see it manifesting, no doubt, in terms of a great deal of hostility, which then takes the form of voting patterns that'll shift, and I'm sure you'll get a lot more idiots who are elected, but they've been elected throughout 200 years of American electoral life. So again, I see it as a very serious matter, and I see that it will create more and more the kind of challenges that I don't know if leadership can deal with, because they're not really all that sophisticated, the ones who are sophisticated, because those people are actually taking advantage of, again, the conditions of digitality. So I see certainly a lot of very serious challenges. I just don't see civil war somehow manifested out of it in time. I'm not sure I'll be around in 20 years anyway, Mr. Ruiz Evans, but I would like to make a bet with you before we part.
Sure.
I'll get my son to represent me.
I'm sure you'll be here. We'll all go in on the bet. Gentleman's bet, $1. What's the bet?
Yeah. Okay. I'm teasing you, of course.
I appreciate it, and I appreciate the pushback, and I appreciate pointing out things were missed. We're doing this series so that we can have intelligent discussions about a very serious topic. And what we've seen the media do, and maybe there's not going to be national divorce, maybe there shouldn't be national divorce, maybe it's not worthy of the level of concern. But what we found the media was doing was saying things like, oh, you red states are going to be poor if you leave, idiots. Oh, well, you blue states are all pedophile lovers. And then that would be the whole piece on the media about this debate. We're never getting into the level of, is there a reason why they're talking about this? Is there some sort of basis? Maybe their ideas are crazy, but are they looking at something? And then on the other side, and does this compare to other events? I don't see that level of discussion. And I think America's deserving of that level of discussion, just to make sure.
Absolutely, sir. Well, let me ask you, I'm not really interested in reading that person's from me, ask you what you understand this proposition to be right now. Can you state it to me, and I will offer my response to it?
Yeah, this debate series or interview series got started with Marjorie Taylor Greene's famous tweet on President's Day. I understand some people are not fans of her. You're not the first. Many people have said that. Other people are fans of her. But we try to interview everybody so that you, the public, can just make up your mind however you want it.
All right.
Anyways, on President's Day, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a sitting Congress member, comes out and says, red and blue differences are so extreme, so hardcore, so insurmountable that we have effectively irreconcilable differences, and therefore we need a national divorce. We just can't live with each other, and so it'd be better that we split off. Now, she wasn't super clear on day one, and so she had to have additional tweets clearing it up, and it's not exactly 100% clear, and she could have said it better, and she could have had more backup data, but roughly the idea and the debate going on now seems to be, do we have states split between red and blue, or full-on secede out of America? Now, maybe they don't have to secede. Maybe they can still stay part of America, and you can have a reduced federalism, and you'd kind of split red and blue states apart. And this would make us more comfortable with each other because we wouldn't have to fight over political ideas. I will point out, that's roughly what it is.
Well, is it going to be a question of secession? Is it going to be a question of a new structure of the Congress? These are blue states, these are red states, and they're separate. They make different decisions. Who makes the unified decisions for the federal government as a whole? Is there going to be a federal government? I mean, the whole thing is so absurd. Why would anyone spend even a moment of thought on such nonsense? What she's trying to say, if I understand you, is, well, things are irreconcilable. Why don't we just have a split? But she has no conception of what a split entails. First of all, succeed means to go against the federal government. Do you think anyone would allow for that? Any Congress would allow for that? Every sovereign authority is really obsessed, jealous of its power. We just have to look at the Chinese, where even a small matter of a little bit of water or islands causes enormous threats. I don't quite see how you could even get started with secession. So put that aside. Then how would you structure blue and red states? After all, blue and red states can change. The Wall Street Journal, I'm not quite sure, but it was emphasizing that there's a lot of business that's going from blue states to red states because red states have much better tax rates, right? They're way but down to 3 or 4% and so on. So what's going to happen there? The blue states will eventually become red states, perhaps. And then what are you going to do? Oh, you're now a red state, will now shift you into this other category. I just can't believe that anyone would bother with this, but you're dealing with a person like that who comes off with, you've heard of her nonsense. How can one even begin to deal with serious matters when this becomes a topic of the media?
I think the answer is that a lot of people are thinking what she's thinking, whether they
And
should or not,
what are
whether
they
it's
thinking?
accurate or not.
What are they thinking? They're thinking of actual units that are categorized as a blue state combination and a red state combination voting independently of each other.
I'll show you. I'll show you.
Okay.
Let's cover some, that's a good point. Let's cover some data. So the reason I can tell you definitively, her quote, her conversation went viral. Whether it should have, whether it shouldn't have, whether it's only stupid idiots following it or intelligentsia, I don't know, but it went viral. There is at least some evidence to suggest that there's millions of Americans who have her same concern that we can't live with each other. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe, like you said, hey, we've gone through bad times before. This is what we do. We make it through. But at this moment, there are significantly millions of Americans who go, can we pull this off together with anymore? Whether they should think that or not. And so that's why her conversation went viral.
Are you getting polls on this question? What are the polls right now?
Yeah, let's go into it. So, let me do this.
Okay.
Okay. If I may, Professor, I'd like to cover a little bit of data for about a minute and then ask you some questions, if I may. Okay.
Please.
This is one poll from Zogby, came out in 2017, I think. 39% agree that each state has the right of secession. 1 second. 1, 2, 3. There was also another poll by Ipsos that came out in March 2023. 47% say they're likely to move out of their state if there was a serious effort to secede, but 53% said they would not necessarily move for sure if their state seceded from America. Republicans are more supportive of secession than Democrats, but the numbers are still relatively low. Largely, at its largest, 77% of the public seem to oppose the word national divorce. Those are recent polls that came out to show that. However, those polls seem to go against these polls. So this poll came out in 2021, and it said, well, here's the map. 47% of liberals on the West Coast supported secession. That means Democrats. 66% of Republicans in the Georgia area and the rest of the South, where Marjorie is, supported secession. And so those are the numbers for there. That's poll's about 2 years old. Here's another poll from the Sabato Crystal Ball Center from the University of Virginia. Center for Politics. It explores the deep divide between Biden and Trump voters. So September 30th, 2021, 80% of Biden voters and 84% of Trump voters feel elected officials from the other party are, quote, a clear and present danger to the USA. 74% of Biden voters and 70.
Wait, you're putting too many words in that. It just says
Right. I
Danger,
shortened it.
you said
Yeah, you're
present
right.
danger. That's fascinating.
You're right. So the original
Okay,
poll
go on.
uses the phrase clear and present danger. I shorten it to the word danger.
Oh,
So that's
they did use that
yeah,
in the poll.
that's on
Okay.
me.
All right. Thank you.
I shortened it to the
No,
word
no, no, you're
danger. It
correct.
was
You're
originally
correct.
clear and
That's what they
present
said.
danger.
Yeah.
Clear and present danger is typically the language used for people worried about an Al-Qaeda attack or a Russian nuclear missile
Exactly.
strike.
Exactly. That's why I
So
was worried.
yeah, so this came out in 2021. 74% of Biden voters and 78% of Trump voters feel all voters from the other side are a clear and present danger to the US of A. That's the phrase they use. That's not what I said. 52% of Trump voters support a national divorce. 41% of Biden voters support a national divorce. Obviously, there's more support by Republicans than Democrats, but 41% is still somewhat significant. This is the poll that came from. Then we have The Big Sort. So The Big Sort is a book that came out about 15 years ago by a famous sociologist. And what he said was people are moving to areas where they can live with people who feel the same politically. They're ideologically sorting themselves out. NPR looked into this in 2008 and said, yes, it's true. NPR also looked into this in 2022, over 10 years later, and said, trend still holds from basically 2000 to 2022. Americans are segregating themselves based upon politics. New York Times also covered this in 2016. And what they were looking at was something that the Big Sort also looked at, which is called landslide voting counties. And this is a map of that. So you go back to 1992. In the red areas mean don't even run as a Democrat. We only vote Republican. And we vote Republican like 20 percentage points more than any Democrat running. If you look at the blue in the 1992 map, don't even run as a Republican. We're all Democrats. You don't have a chance. Most of America was gray in the 1992 map, meaning you could run as a Republican, you could run as a Democrat. It was a competitive race. People would listen to ideas. They were not ideologically wedded. You can look at the map from 92 to 96, 2000, 2004, 2008, and up to 2016. And you can see that gradually going back over 3 decades, we have almost wiped out all the counties where you can run as a Democrat or Republican, and most of America is hardcore red or hardcore blue. We can also look at the presidential election maps. The election map on the left is the presidential election of 2000 by county. The map on the right is the presidential election by county in 2020, looking over a 20-year period. And what you can see on the map on the left is light pink and light blue, meaning they barely voted Republican, barely voted Democrat. Now it's all hardcore Republican, hardcore Democrat mostly. You can see the color shading over a 20-year period. This has also been covered by other publications, Crystal Ball again. This is one of my favorite ones. This goes back to 2004, and it shows there's a massive increase in the percentage of counties where a presidential candidate won by 80% or more, meaning the other guy just wasn't even considered. So you're going from about 5% to 25% from 2008 to 2020. That's significant. Here's Wall Street Journal, How Politics is to Pull the Country. This came out in 2020. This is one of my favorite polls. So if you go back to 1974, 45% of Republicans identified as hardcore conservative. In 2016, it's 76%. In 1974, 28% of Democrats considered themselves hardcore liberal. Now it's 59%. From 1974 to 2016, you basically have a doubling in both parties who are ideologically hardcore wedded and not open to other ideas. Going back over, I think that's a 30, 40-year period. This is some more coverage from Wall Street Journal talking about landslide voting counties. 538, one of the most well-respected liberal polling agencies in 2017, documented the same thing. One of my favorite ones is Time Magazine. Talked about how in 2000, only a third of voters would not date someone of the other party. In 2020, it was half. So it's gone from 1/3, I will never date anyone outside of the party, to half of everyone says, I don't date anyone outside of my party. They're going, wow, that's kind of bad. We can also look at the Pew Research Center 2017. Partisan divide and political values goes even larger. This is one of my favorite charts. So it goes back to 1994, roughly 3 decades ago. And if you look at race, religion, school attendance, education, age, gender, anything, our polarization of each other based upon those issues basically goes down or maintains. In one area, politics, we go from 15% to 36%, basically doubling in the polarization that we feel from 1994 to now in politics, while all other things maintain or get better. And finally, there was some quotes by famous liberals saying, let's go ahead and get out. And then there was also the speech by Joseph Biden in front of 2 active duty Marines in a blood red backdrop, where he appeared to suggest that 74 million Americans were enemies of the state. And that scared the hell out of independent voters and Democrats who said, wow, that's pretty divisive language. We're looking at trends going back to 1990, 1974, and they're showing a definitive increase in polarization to the point that it's affecting elections in every county in America. Does this say, how do we get to a more stable period? Because these trends seem to be going back to 90, 70s, and they seem to be going back a certain way, going over decades. How do we stop that trend of polarization and get to a more stable period?
Well, you're of course asking for an overwhelming task. I would only say that looking at your information, which is fascinating, and I appreciate your sharing them with me. I'm not, again, I'm not against the view that there's more polarization. I think that one would still want to have comparative studies of other periods. You're starting with the 70s and going through the present. What about other periods in the United States? Is this unique, this polarization, or can one get statistics? There are plenty of historians doing studies of earlier periods in the United States. So I would just make one little comment on that. Let's see how broadly all this is truly unique and to what degree it's a pattern. There's no doubt that there's been greater inequalities, the problems that you've raised about ethnicity and so on. All of those are coming to a head, have come to a head, and they've built up, particularly after the 90s. So there's no doubt that there's some serious matters here. What I began with in terms of the question that you were raising was, how does this manifest itself in what people want? The evidence, so-called, that you were showing me earlier was about. Now, I lived in the South as a young man. I went to junior high school and high school in Jacksonville, Florida, and my first year was of university was actually in Auburn University. At that time, the most common view was, yeah, we need to secede from the United States. It was part of your pride, not mine, by the way, of being in the old Confederate order. And of course, since then, there have been all kinds of other irritants, at least for the South, such as great heroes being demoted and so on. But let me point on the other side. I went to Robert E. Lee High School in Jacksonville. And just this last year, because again, Robert E. Lee was a slave owner, the name of the high school was changed to Riverside High School, which is where it's located. And there wasn't any great dissension or any great second thoughts about it. And this is Jacksonville, which is a pretty conservative place. What I'm trying to say is that you have these matters coming up, expressions of intransigence, but do they really manifest in terms of, I insist, let's split up the blues and reds, or what seemed to be more the material you were bringing up, let's secede. Do people really understand what it means to secede? Secede means now you create your own organization, your own military, your own bureaucracy, all that stuff. Do they have the slightest conception of what that is implied? Of course, you can say when the mob gets out of hand, they don't really care, and then eventually it's resolved in the messy way it was, let's say, in the Russian Revolution and other places like that. But still, as you move towards what you might consider the moment quantum change in that way, will there be enough people who say, yes, let's go ahead, let's just jump? I seriously doubt it. Let's also add a little piece of information that hasn't come up, I think, so far, and that is the weird effects of media that really took off in the 90s, right? It's only then that the internet was made generally available. As we all know, The internet was created in the 70s. It was available in the 80s among certain people like academics where I was at Berkeley, but then in the 90s, it was available for commercial purposes, right? And ever since then, a whole mode of communication has taken off. And that communication is oriented towards criticism, towards quick and short-term criticism. Now you can say, well, that's the way it is, and that's affecting people and their attitudes. And you're right. But on the other hand, it's very, very, shall I say, voluble. It changes quickly overnight in terms of this or that. So that also has to be taken into account if you're trying to work out what are actually political pressures that people are going to bring to bear in terms of insisting, let's have blue and red states, which is absurd, or at least it makes sense, even though I'm against it. Secession, at least secession has a meaning to it. Yes, we're going to withdraw from something called the United States of America. Well, give it a try. So I am, again, I'm not worried about the question of this translating into some kind of Armageddon. I completely agree. There is, again, a state that we've come to a great deal of intransigence. The only thing we can do is to continue as you're doing, sir, having intelligent programs, talking, reflecting, exchanging, being somewhat more open to the other side, although not necessarily accepting nonsense. And frankly, the person from Georgia is spouting nonsense as far as I can tell. And I'm happy to listen to conservatives. My first real political theory book was Barry Goldwater, Conscience of a Conservative. I was 15 when I read that, and there have been
love
conservatives that I've read with great serious, including who's had quite an influence.
I had a couple points I'd like to make. So I completely agree with what you said. Governments are obsessed with power. When they have power, it is not their nature to give it up. Some people have said the way to deal with this difference between red and blue is more federalism. I have been somewhat skeptical of that for the reasons that you said. Why would a super powerful government start giving up its power? Like, that's just not typically the way humans operate over the last 10,000 years of culture. Maybe. I will point out that there is a way to secede that is legal. You cannot unilaterally secede. You can't say, I'm out of here and I just decide I want to go on my own. The Supreme Court said if you did get permission of the other states, something the South never did. The South never went to the North and said, hey, guys, let's talk, and then can we have a vote on this? They just said, we're out. We don't want to talk with you. We don't want to even be in Congress. Everybody leave Congress, no discussion, and then we're going to start shooting. There is a path that says if you can get consent of the states, whatever that's defined as. Technically, Marjorie did not preclude herself from that because she did not tell everybody, leave Congress and let's not discuss. In fact, she used the phrase negotiated settlement. So there's something there. I'm not saying she's as well versed on the laws that she's talking about as she should be, but I'm just saying there's something there. I also want to point out a lot of people laughed at her and said, because she says, everyone I talk to is talking about this. And they go, oh, you stupid idiot, that's not true. And I showed you there is a poll that showed 66% of people in her area were talking about it. So does she have it fully thought out? No. Is there a lot of details not there? Yes. Should she have done more research and background when she presented such a heavy hot topic? Yes. But I've also seen where people are saying everything she's saying is a lie, and that's not true. There were a couple tiny points, I didn't say the whole thing, tiny points that she was sort of speaking some truth, and that was not acknowledged by the media. So I wanted to cover that.
Okay.
The answer, I think, I'm sorry.
You're perfectly right. Congress has the final decision whether it wants to take you in or let you go. That's certainly true. Also, there was that ridiculous attempt, when was it, a couple of years ago in California, to have 3 states. But it was kicked out immediately because you don't have the power to do that as a state. That's something that Congress decides.
Well, also Californians were against it. That was the thing they ignored.
You can leave. It's just one of those nonsensical, as it were, possibilities or hypotheticals.
They did polling on Tim Draper's plan to split California to 3 states, and then his other plan to split it into 6 states. And the Public Policy Institute of California did polling on both occasions. It was like 57 and 63 or 73% of Californians were against it. They were never going to get the votes. You have to get the home state majority to approve of it. And a majority of Californians are, whether this is smart or not, they are against splitting up California. Californians have this idea in their head of our shape of our state, and that's the way they expect it to stay. And when you look at those maps going back to the ancient Spanish period, it's really damn close. So we have this mystique. Mountain of paradise that kind of go. That's what I've seen. Californians, right or wrong, good or bad, have some picture in their head of this is California. It's that kind of half triangle state, and that's the way it has to be for all time. I do want to point out that you're totally right. How do we even split these states?
There's no right to do that. Let me just make a point about my book, by the way. There's a chapter in which I go at length, because my book is actually subtitled Greater California, to show that California has an enormous influence historically, but also economically, over these adjoining states, which were at once part of Greater California under the Hispanic rule. And what I wanted to emphasize in that chapter was to say we Californians also bear a great responsibility. We can't just be thinking California. We have to think that we really strongly influence, and we should take that into account when we consider issues, including water issues and so many other matters that have to do with our economics. So I just want to mention that.
I really appreciate that. And again, for everybody watching this, I like being corrected. I like pushback. I like data. The reason that we're doing this is I have my own opinions, but I don't care what my own opinions are. I noticed
there was what your opinions are. They're good opinions.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking to you. You're from Berkeley. You're a liberal. I've talked to a hardcore Trump supporter. Come as you are. I want us to start. I think what you were suggesting is the solution. We actually start listening to each other. Going, what do you think? I'm going to shut up and just listen to what you have to say. Doesn't mean I agree.
Yes.
But I'm going to take maybe an hour to hear where you're coming from. And I'm going to try to understand instead of shout down everything you say as you're saying and call it stupid. I might try to start from a place of understanding so I can have a dialogue with you. We didn't see anyone in the media doing it. That's why we're asking everybody, like, will you participate? And I'm going to ask you later, Professor, if you found that this was a fair conversation and we were only trying to have an honest dialogue, is there anybody else you know who'd be willing to be part of an honest conversation? They could be on the left, they could be on the right, they could be for secession, they could think secession's the stupidest thing. We just want to talk to people who can form complete sentences and explain the reasonings behind what they said, and are less apt to go, all Republicans are idiots, all Democrats are, fill in the slander. We find that's the level of the media. We don't want to do that. Let me ask you, I'm sorry.
But you've actually found people who can make complete sentences. You realize you've eliminated a substantial number of people.
I do, but we do our best. We do our best to try to reach out to people.
But again, conservatives have excellent qualities of writing good sentences and expressing them. William Buckley was one of my favorites as I was going through the 70s and 80s.
And we interviewed F.H. Buckley, who was a former speechwriter for Trump, and he was very intelligent. Very, very good interview. Let me ask you, I think you've already stated the answer, but I want to clarify. You're saying that we can go to more stable periods. How do we get there? I think you were saying the answer is this. The only way out, it's not federalism, it's not secession, it's not splitting up the states, it's more dialogue. Is that what you're saying? Am I getting this wrong?
No, you're perfectly on the right track. Yeah.
So not federalism, not splitting the states. Those are vastly complex issues. You guys haven't really thought it out. I can back that up. The answer is we learn how to talk with each other more.
Well, I do want to add a little footnote. My emphasis on California still included the thought that, who knows, someday California could be so powerful that it should be a sovereign state, but that's something in the future. But I do want to emphasize that there's something about California, what it does, what it has done, what it will do, that shakes the rest of the country up. Now, I'm not going to recommend that Congress be changed so that California gets half the votes. The United States has to show real respect for this power, and Californians also have to recognize their power. They shouldn't think it away. And so in many ways, I am a strong Californian And it seems to me historically, it's playing a role that's really quite unique. So I do want that to be marked down as well. It's just that I don't see any reason for one to think about California secession now. Secession takes place when there are very serious things falling apart. That's not.
I agree, but that was the reason that Californians entertained secession was they thought that America was falling apart. I was there. I was there in Sacramento the day that Trump was elected. I was on the ground. The entire Capitol lawn was full of people who were just sobbing uncontrollably. There was so much weeping and crying. The entire Capitol ground was covered. You could hear it a block away before you even got there. It was serene. The streets were crawling with agitated people marching, and there were 100 cops who all had their hand on their gun like this because they thought it was going to pop off. I was there that night. I helped do some crowd control and calm some people down. Californians really thought that America was over and, they're done. In fact, the California legislature issued a joint declaration where they used the phrase, "We woke up today feeling we were foreigners in a foreign land." The legislature said that. We also have.
I didn't know that quote. Really?
Yeah, Kevin De Leon, and when he was head of the legislature, issued that statement. You also have polling from Reuters, Ipsos, and Stanford University that showed 32% of Californians said immediate secession today. No discussion, no talk, no work through, no let's come together and try to understand each other. Get the hell out, and I mean in the next 24 hours. Those surveys also asked, are you against or are you opposed or do you not know? When we start to look at the people who are not opposed and don't know how they felt, it jumps to 47.5% of Californians, according to Reuters, Ipsos, and separately Stanford University, were open to full-blown secession and did not say, I could never leave America. That's basically half. That's within the margin of error of half. I would remind you that Brexit qualified with a 51 or 52% vote threshold. California was literally within the margin of error of that international record in 2017. Just a little bit of facts, totally backing up what you're saying. But if we can.
By the way, I sobbed when Nixon won in '68. So
okay, fair enough. I sobbed when they passed the Patriot
yeah, there's
Act
a lot of crying that goes on when you're on the losing side.
Yeah.
And if this 32% were willing to back it up, we would have seen some effects. What did they do about it? Nothing. They just expressed their opinion, and so they were able to pound their chests about it.
Well, they did actually qualify to get signatures on the ballot on 3 separate occasions legally through the California government, so they could put it up for a vote legally the next time California voters voted, where they would ask them if they wanted to be independent. So they did at least walk it through the government system. They got it approved.
It's not 32%. For what? What's the figure that you need signatures?
Signatures, you need 600,000 signatures.
Yeah, what is that?
It's a little tough. It's doable. It's a little tough. There was also the rumor that the whole Calexit thing was organized and funded by Vladimir Putin himself. And he funded the whole thing, and it was all a secret plot from him, none of which was proven true. But a lot of people thought that, and a lot of people left in the movement because of that. They didn't want to be associated with Russia. I remember the episode of Rachel Maddow where she came out celebrating Calexit in an interview with Javier Becerra, and then 3 months later came out with an episode saying Calexit was a plot of Vladimir Putin in order to destroy America and kill Americans and have blood running down the streets. Yes, she said that. And then Rachel Maddow completely forgot her earlier segment where she completely supported the idea. So there was a little bit of that. That's neither here nor there. The question I want to get to is, when Marjorie Taylor Greene said we need a national divorce, one of the things the media said was they interviewed a Utah governor who said, Marjorie, we don't need a national divorce, silly. We need marriage counseling. What does marriage counseling look like for a population of 300 million that is experiencing the level of polarization we've just covered? Who does that? I'd also add, before you answer, Donald Trump, one of the most divisive figures ever.
I'm not going to answer.
Joseph Biden is the president. He says, I will heal America. I will be a return to decent America. There will be, quote, a calming period when I'm here. Republicans will realize what they did is wrong. America will come together. I'll bring us all together. And then we had January 6th after he said that. So if we have two presidents in a row who can't bring the country together, who's supposed to be the marriage counselor for a population of 300 million that's this polarized?
Well, what president, in your view, brought the country together in the past?
Oh, man. That's a good question.
It's always been a problem. Maybe temporarily FDR, after he had a long period of, being president, perhaps, and the war circumstances. That's about all I can think
of. I am assuming it has to be the president, and you correctly called that out. But if it's not the president, who does marriage counseling? The president's supposed to be the spokesperson for the country, so to speak, whether that's official or not. The president's supposed to be the one that's the exemplification of the country, the embodiment, et cetera, the first family. So if it's not the president, who does it? How do we get marriage counseling? I think you've hinted at the solution that we have to start talking with each other, but who's going to get America to do that? Who's going to encourage people on the right and the left that we need to start talking with each other? Who does that? What group? How does this happen? How do we have this national dialogue that brings us all together and reduces the tension and looks something like marriage counseling? Because I have yet to see anyone in America identify the solution. I've seen 30 different newspaper publications say marriage counseling is the answer. What does that mean? No one will say. Do you have any idea what that could possibly be to save America?
Well, does marriage counseling work anyway? It works sometimes and it doesn't work. No, I mean that seriously. When you look at how they go about trying to bring people together.
You're the second person to say that.
I'm not going to bring up money. It's a problem anyway. But that doesn't mean that it's not worth doing. And therefore, it seems to me that what you're bringing up as potential is, don't just think the president is the one who has to do that. There are plenty of other people who have positions of power in Congress and elsewhere, also in other areas, who can mitigate the nature of their comments, their propositions, their relation to the other side, whatever the other side may be, not necessarily in terms of straight specific matters that have to do with, let's say, global warming, what's your position on oil, what's your position on this and that, to find a way in which one could perhaps come to common ground. And if one fails, then one at least is still trying. I think that's a general task. It's a kind of a vague operation, and of course it does go back in many ways to your sense of ultimate loyalties. If you really have no interest in America, yeah, that's a problem.
I see people.
I can't really quite don't. They may say all kinds of things as one likes to. You're asked in a mood of temper about this or that, and so you take a very strong position. Yeah, let's get out of the country and so on. But are you really that far removed from the country that's supporting you, that's providing you with what you're able to live by? I would be very, very surprised if that's the case. But that doesn't mean that the arguments don't take place. After all, any family, the arguments are
that is the question.
Often more
you're asking the question, are we there yet? Is it bad enough? And I really appreciate you debating with me on this, I think, because this is the question people should be asking. And
I agree.
I don't know. Obviously, we agree that division has increased over a 2 to 3 decade time period.
I agree.
Can it get better? Will it get worse? We don't know. Well, let me ask you, could it get worse than it is now? Do you think things could get worse than they are now?
I think definitely things could get worse. Again, it depends on violence. I think the moment you cross over into violence, and that's, I would guess, why you're giving great emphasis to the coup of January the 6th, then there's a kind of open-endedness to things that is very worrisome, because even if it's put down, the putting down of that kind of violence produces further resentments and so on and so forth. So in principle, it really depends on these people who want to cross that line. How far do they want to go? So far, what I'm getting a sense of is that there's a kind of a floating off of that violence, shootings that are taking place without any meaning. These shootings, and as a Californian, we had some very curious cases here recently. I say curious because in both of these cases, the individuals are very old, 60s or 70s. They were of an Asian ethnicity. It didn't make any sense to me that they would go to that kind of craziness. So I think there's a little bit of that violence floating off into those areas of whatever you want to call it, serial killing and so
Could
on. And that's that kind of violence, then I would say, yes, it could get worse. I'm just saying that would be a sign of things are getting worse.
Okay. So like when there was a man who came from Gilroy, who came from Nevada, specifically to Gilroy Garlic Festival to kill Californians and gunned them down with a machine gun. And then there was another man who flew from Missouri to light fires in California national parks to kill Californians. That if we saw more things like that, that would be a sign of things getting worse.
You just every other day we've had so many cases. This year has been a terrible year.
True. But I've in my life and covering this, I have never seen people leave outside of California to come to California to kill Californians, except for the last few years. Never seen that, never heard of that. Right. And it's happened twice in the last couple of years. So does it mean it's going to go that way? I don't know. Just we're looking at trends. Let me ask you last minute question, and then I'm going to ask you if you have any final thoughts. So this is, yes, Marjorie Taylor Greene did not think this through and explain all the details. She started a conversation. I'm not saying she gave all the answers at all. Fair enough. But I'm trying to be fair. There's some things to what she said, decent conversation to have. Did she explain it all? No. So this was something that I was looking at.
Okay.
So if you look at the map of Georgia, they're saying Georgia's a purple state, sort of. Atlanta is hardcore blue, and then the rest of Georgia is basically 90% red. If we look at Texas, there's the urban triangle from Houston up to Dallas and then down and to Austin and San Antonio. That represents about 1/5 of the landmass of Texas. The entire rest of it is largely red. If we go to Illinois, Illinois is not purple. Chicago is hardcore blue, and then 95% of the rest of Illinois is red. Same thing with Oregon. If we look at California, which is my favorite, people go, oh, you guys are crawling with Republicans more than other states. True, but they're outnumbered. For example, my stepdad is a Republican who's voted that way. He's also married to a Latina. He's also let undocumented immigrants work in his house and got them citizenship, and he hangs out with a bunch of immigrants. He does not like all the California liberal policies, but if he was going to leave, he already would have left. His business and his family's here, and they're outnumbered. The only areas in California where conservatives consistently outvote us is basically in the mountains and far north. It's not even the valley. It's not the urban areas. And as you see in the map on the bottom left, there's almost a neat dividing line between red and blue. Would it be impossible, given that America has in the past had 4 states legally break off from other states, totally constitutional, we absolutely did it, completely legal, 4 different cases. Is it completely outlandish and impossible for us to think about splitting states up where you get the major metro area that's 90%?
For those 4 cases, I can only think of West Virginia and Virginia, which was under the exigencies of the Civil War. What are the other 3?
So Kentucky,
North Carolina, and South Carolina.
Kentucky from Virginia, 1792. Maine from Massachusetts, 1820. West Virginia from Virginia, 1863, and Vermont from New York, 1790. Some people also look at North Carolina from Kentucky in 1796. That's a bit questionable. You could also look at West Virginia. It's a bit questionable, but at least there's 3 others: Virginia, Kentucky, Massachusetts, Maine, New York.
Okay, but I think in most cases there were much wider boundaries for those southern states at the beginning, and then they broke down into units, etc. In any case, your last example would be 1863-64 Virginia and West Virginia. So that's not really very convincing in any way that this is something in the offing or it's something that can be done.
We've done it 3 times legally, but that doesn't mean we can't do it again in the future.
Those are just early figures. Excuse me?
But 3 times we legally had a state split off from another state through a vote, through consensus, through the democratic process enshrined in the Constitution. None of those were overturned. We have at least 3 different case studies saying that you can legally do this.
Yeah, I'm not denying that, but the force that decides on that legally is the Congress.
Sure.
So if you're saying, can Congress decide on making one state called the
Chicago and another state called real Illinois.
The point is here.
Yeah, you have to get both everybody in the state to agree, and then you have to get everybody in the Congress to agree. So huge hurdle, gigantic political hurdle, of course, but
impossible, I would say, practically speaking.
Okay. But when we're talking about how would you even split up states, there is a legal process. And how would these people live together? Well, if you have the area that's 90% red break off, they're going to stay red for the next 10 to 20 years. And if you have Chicago break off and it's blue, it's going to stay blue for the next 10 to 20 years. It would be hard for the remaining part of Illinois without any major urban centers outside of Chicago to go back to being blue if we did that split. Just looking at it that, if it was possible to get the vote from Congress, and if you could somehow convince everybody in both states, and I understand huge, gigantic, million-mile hurdle, I get it, but if we had a wand and we could just magically go, boom, Congress approves, boom, states approve. If we had a legal vote, peaceful to split the states, and they were split by the red and blue, would that help keep the peace for a little bit?
No. First of all, the transition of that sort of order would, I would say, destroy the federal union in the first place. So then you fall into some kind of, if you don't mind my saying, situations that exist in other parts of the world where state boundaries were created by colonial efforts and so on. And then once things got serious, they split up in so many different ways and there were rogue states and so on. So no.
Okay. So no state splits.
I don't think it would succeed anyway. I think it would create a new out of that would come something else. But so it's really not very interesting for me. I remember that there was always this talk in the case of New York, since you're referring to secession, that New York City is so unique, it should be separate from New York State. And it's been a conversation point for a long, long time, and it's never happened. That would be the classic case. And why doesn't it happen? That's something to look into as far as the politics.
That's fair. It hasn't happened, although it is continually reproposed. I will point out that while it doesn't happen, there is some major politician who digs it up every couple of years and thinks it's a worthwhile thing.
People want, as it were, the most favorable terms. So they feel that they're carrying the burden of the rest of the state, which they are in the sense that it's the financial center, and therefore they're losing money. After all, I think still most tax money is going out of California rather than coming in. As far I'm not quite sure right now what the figures are. So I guess Californians would say, look, we're keeping up the rest of the country. Why should we do that? And the answer is because there are some tremendous benefits and it's part of our history. As far as the map you have there of the red state, the red part of all of that is, of course, for the most part, agricultural. And I will say personally, I regret that I love to drive into the country at least once a week, and I love to be in the the farmland, the beauty of it, the way it's so wonderfully taken care of. But I don't have a single friend who's a farmer. I would love to have a friend whom I could visit and he could show me how it works, because I admire agriculture and I admire the way our farmland is taken care of, whether you want to call it agribusiness and so on. There's some wonderful out there doing tremendous work, but there's no connection. So there's where, personally, I'm calling out to somebody out there, invite me over, and maybe that's the beginning of us crossing, because I'll tell you some things about Berkeley, which I really don't like, frankly. In many ways. I'll be happy to hear what your life is like. But it doesn't happen. I don't know a single person in my entourage of friends who knows someone who actually works in agriculture.
I was born and raised in Fresno. I'm in Fresno right now. It's the center of the Ag Valley. I know a lot of farmers. You're welcome to come on down. I'll buy you a beer and I'll introduce you to a couple if you want.
Please, I mean that. Invite me over.
And I'm in Fresno. I'm from Fresno. I'm a Valley boy. People don't get that because I dress and I talk well, but born and raised Valley, Central Valley. You want me to talk like I'm from around here? I'll say the word wash. You say, you know what wash means? That's a Valley term for wash. Nobody uses that word. Wash. You don't say wrestling, you say wrestle. You come up to Valley people and you say, hey, I'll go wrestle you and get some wash. And they go, oh, you're one of us. I'm telling you, I know what's up, but just Don't let the smooth exterior fool you. We are winding down. I think the conclusion you're saying is federalism is not an option. The federal government's not going to let it go. State splitting seems very complex. Things are more divided than before, but the only answer is to reach out and to dialogue with each other. Is that a fair summary, Professor?
Well, as soon as you invite me over into the agricultural lands, that'll be the proof.
Fine. I will get you that invitation.
I should mention, by the way, that I'm Armenian on my mother's side, and so Fresno is a very dear place for me.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of its history. Yeah.
Fresno is crawling with Armenians. We are the second largest Armenian community after Glendale.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
But
yes, sir.
We think our Armenian food's better than Glendale. They hate hearing that in LA. They hate that. But we're like, yeah, Glendale's cool. You got some Armenians. We like our Armenians. We like our Armenian food better, but you guys are cool. They hate that attitude in Glendale. They're like, no, this is the Armenian center. We're like, have you heard of a place called Fresno? We had, William Saroyan was from the Valley. He wasn't from Glendale. Just saying. Saroyan is from our area, not yours. Just pointing it out.
I know. He's the ultimate Armenian American Californian.
Sure. If you are, I thought Saroyan was a Mexican as a boy because I'm Latino. And I kind of thought everybody was Latino, and they kept talking about Saroyan as a boy, and I didn't really know different ethnic groups. I go, oh, this guy must be Latin like me. Because if you grew up in the Valley, you are taught all about Saroyan. You are taught to worship Saroyan. Every child in the Valley knows who William Saroyan is and to look up to him, and you have to read his work. And yeah, I
love it.
He's a part of who we are. You can't separate William Saroyan from Valley identity. Last minute business. We got to go here. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Great pleasure, actually.
I appreciate that. I hope you found that this was not gotcha
I very much
journalism.
Enjoyed the sharpness of your questions and comments. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I hope you found this isn't gotcha journalism. We're trying to have a conversation. Is there anyone, and you don't have to say now, you could email, but is there anyone that you could recommend who'd be willing to be part of an honest conversation?
Oh, quite a few people. What are you looking for? I can always orient it somewhat.
Anybody who can talk about political division in America intelligently. If it's bad, if it's good, if they think it's, they don't have to agree. It's just, can they? I shall
get in touch with 2 or 3 recommendations for sure.
Thank you. I will send you the video. We really appreciate the recommendations. In our last minute, Professor, this is the question we always ask people. A week from now, somebody watched this video and they're going, I watched this video with the Professor CHYTRY and he was pretty good. I don't remember everything clearly, but there was this one thing he said at the end and I just can't get it out of my head. What is that sticky thought where if they forget everything else, this is the one ghostly thought that you have incepted in their mind that they just can't stop thinking about? What would that be, Professor?
Think California as specially responsible for leading the United States, and that's a huge responsibility. If you're a Californian, think seriously of what you are contributing and how it's helping to transform the United States, which it is anyway.
Okay. Any last minute comments? Any other thoughts where you like people to find you or anything else, Professor?
I think I'm exhausted, frankly.
Sorry. I did a 3-hour interview with someone. They're like, "Why?" They're like, "Hey, if they're willing to talk, I'll just keep talking." I don't know when to shut off. You guys are like,
well, I want to get the video because I want to go through the statistics and material you so helpfully provided when we were talking of positions of intransigence. There was a lot you provided, and I could only very quickly try to catch up on them. It's invaluable. I'd love to go through it with my own speed and learn much more. You obviously have this in hand, but I don't.
And that's just, we've been doing it. So, and we're not even saying our research is exhaustive or complete. It's pretty good. But
it's good.
We needed to show people, because some people were coming up and saying there's no division. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Unicorns are real. Everything's cool. And I was like, okay, I don't want to contradict you, but that's not accurate. But I can't say you're wrong in an interview. So I would go, here's this data, totally baseless or something here. And that would sort of force people to have to go, okay, well, there's something going on. Now, maybe I wouldn't interpret it like you. I wouldn't say it's bad, but you're right. There's something. So that was a labor of love built up over many conversations. That's the only reason it's there.
Well, there you are. You've already persuaded me. I'm going to take much more seriously your concerns. I mean that seriously. I'm not just saying that.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to email you a copy of the show.
Very
Please
seriously
think about
this.
recommendations.
And I'm what Green had to say yourself.
We just want to have
Excuse
honest
me?
conversations with people who are willing to talk. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Professor.
Absolutely.
I'll
I admire your efforts. Thank you.